The world tilted on its axis in the sterile, unforgiving corridor of a hospital. Isabella Croft, 6 months pregnant and clutching a future she thought was certain, saw it all crumble in a single, horrifying instant. Her husband, Julian, the man who had vowed to protect her, stood beside his impeccably dressed mistress, Chloe, his face a mask of cold indifference. As a wave of dizziness washed over her, the polished linoleum floor rushed up to meet her. The last thing she saw before darkness consumed her was Julian turning away, his hand protectively on Chloe's arm. She was collapsing, and they were walking away. But they made one critical mistake. They underestimated the man who received her one desperate phone call after she came to her father. And Arthur Sterling, the CEO who had built an empire from nothing, was about to teach his daughter's husband the true meaning of the word consequences. The antiseptic scent of the hospital always made Isabella's stomach churn. It was a smell of vulnerability, of life hanging precariously in the balance. Today, it felt like a premonition. She had come for a routine checkup, a simple glucose test, but an argument that had started in the car over a trivial expense had festered, following them into the hushed, busy hallways of the maternity ward. "I just don't understand why you need a $4,000 stroller, Izzy," Julian said, his voice a low, controlled hiss. He ran a hand through his perfectly styled dark hair, a gesture that once soothed her, but now felt like a performance. "It's fiscally irresponsible." "It's the safest one on the market, Julian," she replied, her voice trembling slightly. Hormones and a deep, unsettling feeling made her defensive. "Our son. I just want the best for him." "Our son will be fine with a perfectly adequate $1,000 stroller," he retorted, his eyes flicking to the nurse's station, as if to ensure no one was overhearing his lecture on frugality. This from a man who had bought a Patek Philippe watch last month because he was celebrating a new quarter. The hypocrisy was a physical blow. "This isn't about the stroller, is it? This is about control. You've been like this for months. Distant, critical." A flicker of something ugly crossed his face. "Maybe if you weren't so emotional all the time, I wouldn't have to be." The word struck her harder than a physical blow. Emotional. Unstable. He had been planting these seeds for weeks, subtle digs couched in concern. "I'm pregnant, Julian. I'm growing our child. Of course I'm emotional. There's a difference between emotional and hysterical," he snapped. That was when she saw her. A woman with sleek blonde hair and a sharp, tailored suit standing just down the hall, pretending to be engrossed in her phone. Chloe Vance, a junior VP from Julian's firm. Isabella had met her at a holiday party. Julian had introduced her as a real shark, a rising star. The way he looked at her then had made Isabella's skin crawl. The way he was looking at her now, a silent, impatient signal passing between them, confirmed everything. The world went silent. The beeping of monitors, the squeak of shoes, the low murmur of conversations, it all faded away. There was only the cold, hard certainty that crashed down on her. "She's here for you," Isabella whispered, the words barely audible. Julian's face went blank. "Don't be ridiculous. She is here for you, at my prenatal appointment." The absurdity of it, the sheer, brazen cruelty, stole her breath. "Who does that, Julian?" He took a step closer, grabbing her arm. "You're making a scene. Stop it. Let go of me." She tried to pull away, her heart hammering against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. "Isabella, I'm warning you." "Or what? You'll tell everyone I'm hysterical?" The words came out louder now, laced with a pain so sharp it bordered on rage. "You brought your mistress to my OB-GYN appointment." His composure finally cracked. In the sterile, fluorescent-lit hallway, Julian's hand flew. The slap wasn't just a sound, it was a detonation. It echoed, sharp and ugly, silencing the corridor. The sting on her cheek was immediate, but the shock was a paralytic cold that spread through her veins. Her hand flew to her face, her eyes wide with disbelief. This wasn't Julian. This couldn't be him. Is everything all right here? A calm, authoritative voice cut through the haze. Dr. Evans, her obstetrician, was standing in a nearby doorway, her face a mask of professional concern. But her eyes were sharp, missing nothing. Julian's face paled. He dropped his hand as if burned. He looked from Dr. Evans to Isabella, then back to Chloe, who was now staring openly, her mask of nonchalance gone. Without another word, he turned and walked away, joining Chloe at the end of the hall before disappearing around the corner. He didn't look back. Isabella stood frozen, the imprint of his hand burning on her skin. The illusion of her marriage, her life, her future, hadn't just cracked. It had been pulverized into dust. Dr. Evans gently guided her into an examination room, her voice a soothing balm of clinical questions and quiet support. But Isabella's mind was a maelstrom. He left her. He struck her and left her. As a nurse checked her blood pressure, which was dangerously high, Isabella fumbled for her phone. Her fingers were numb, clumsy. She scrolled past Julian in her contacts, a name that now looked foreign and menacing. There was only one person who could anchor her in this storm. She pressed the call button. It rang once. "Isabella, is the checkup over? Everything okay?" The voice was deep, calm, and resonant with unwavering strength. It was the voice that had guided her entire life. She broke. A sob tore from her throat, raw and ragged. "Dad!" she choked out. "Dad, I need you!" Arthur Sterling was a man who operated on a plane of calculated precision. His world was one of billion-dollar mergers, hostile takeovers, and boardroom battles where a single misplaced word could cost fortunes. He was not a man given to panic, but the raw, shattered sound of his daughter's voice on the phone bypassed every layer of his legendary composure. It was a sound he hadn't heard since she was 6 years old and had fallen from a swing set. It was the sound of pure, undiluted fear. "Where are you?" he asked, his voice deceptively calm, even as he was already motioning for his executive assistant to clear his schedule for the rest of the eternity. "St. Catherine's Hospital, the maternity ward. I'm on my way. Don't move. Don't talk to anyone. I'll be there in 15 minutes. He hung up. True to his word, 14 minutes later, the doors to the maternity ward slid open, and Arthur Sterling entered. He was not a physically imposing man, but he possessed an aura of gravity that seemed to bend the space around him. Dressed in a flawlessly tailored charcoal suit, his silver hair cut with military precision, he moved with the quiet confidence of a predator. His eyes, the same piercing blue as Isabella's, scanned the area until they found her, sitting on an examination bed, looking small and fragile. He didn't say a word. He walked to her, gently took her face in his hands, and examined the red mark on her cheek, his jaw tightening almost imperceptibly. He then enveloped her in a hug, not the gentle, comforting embrace of a typical father, but a solid, grounding hold that felt like a fortress wall. "He will pay for this," Arthur said, his voice a low rumble. It wasn't a promise of revenge, it was a statement of fact, as certain as the sunrise. He handled everything with ruthless efficiency. He spoke briefly with Dr. Evans, his questions sharp and precise, obtaining a copy of the report documenting Isabella's elevated blood pressure and the visible mark on her face. He thanked the doctor for her intervention, a look passing between them that confirmed a shared understanding. Then he guided Isabella out of the hospital, shielding her from the curious glances of the staff, and into the silent, leather-clad interior of his waiting town car. The ride to his sprawling Manhattan penthouse was silent. Isabella stared out the window, the city lights a blur of indifferent colors. The home she had shared with Julian, a brownstone in the West Village, felt like enemy territory. Her father's home was the only sanctuary she had left. The penthouse was a testament to Arthur's personality, vast, minimalist, with clean lines and floor-to-ceiling windows offering a godlike view of the city. It was a place of power and control. He led her to a guest suite that was larger than her first apartment, poured her a glass of water, and sat in an armchair opposite the bed where she perched. "Tell me everything," he said. "From the beginning. Every comment, every withdrawal, every late night at the office." And so it all came pouring out. The little barbs about her spending, the suggestions that her pregnancy was making her irrational, the increasing number of business trips and late-night meetings, the way he had started locking his office at home. Piece by piece, the mosaic of Julian's betrayal took shape. It wasn't a spontaneous affair. It was a calculated campaign. Arthur listened without interruption, his expression unchanging, but Isabella could see the cold fire building in his eyes. When she finished, exhausted and emotionally raw, he simply nodded. "Good," he said. "Now we know the terrain." He picked up his phone and made 2 calls. The first was to his eldest son, Elias Sterling, Isabella's brother and a partner at one of the most formidable corporate law firms in New York. "Elias," Arthur said, his tone all business. "Change of plans. Meet me at the apartment. We have a family crisis. It involves Julian Croft." The second call was to a name Isabella didn't recognize. "Marcus, Arthur Sterling, I have a situation that requires your unique and immediate attention. Discretion is paramount. It concerns my son-in-law, Julian Croft." He hung up and looked at Isabella, his gaze softening for the first time. "You are a Sterling. You are my daughter. You are carrying my grandchild. You are not a victim, Isabella. You are the survivor of an attack, and we are now going on the offensive." He wanted a war. He just doesn't realize he declared it against the wrong empire. That night, for the first time in months, Isabella slept without fear, wrapped in the impenetrable safety of the Sterling fortress. She didn't know the specifics of her father's plan, but she knew the look in his eyes. It was the same look he got before a hostile takeover. Julian Croft had slapped the daughter of a king in his own kingdom, and the king was about to move his pieces onto the board. Within 24 hours, Arthur Sterling's penthouse had transformed into a command center. Elias, Isabella's older brother, arrived first. He shared their father's sharp intellect, but possessed a calmer, more methodical demeanor. He greeted Isabella with a fierce hug before his lawyer's mind took over, his laptop open and a notepad filling with an intricate web of questions. Soon after, Ava Ramirez arrived. She was a legend in New York family law, a petite woman with a reputation for being a tactical genius in the courtroom. Arthur had her on retainer for the Sterling Corporation's executive team, a preemptive measure for just this kind of messy, high-stakes divorce. "The hospital report is our cornerstone," Ava said, her voice crisp and clear. "Dr. Evans's testimony as a third-party professional witness is invaluable. We file for an emergency protective order first thing in the morning. He won't be able to come within 500 feet of you or this residence, but the true bombshell arrived in a discreet leather briefcase carried by Marcus Thorne. He was a former FBI agent who now ran the city's most exclusive private investigations firm. He looked more like a history professor than a PI, with his tweed jacket and thoughtful expression, but his eyes had a frighteningly analytical glint. "Mr. Sterling, Isabella," he began, placing a slim folder on the polished mahogany table. "Julian Croft has not been merely careless. He has been arrogant, He opened the folder. The first photos were what Isabella had expected, what she had dreaded. Julian and Chloe Vance, dining at intimate restaurants, kissing in the shadow of a downtown awning, entering a boutique hotel in Soho. The visual confirmation was still a gut punch, stealing the air from her lungs. Elias placed a steadying hand on her shoulder. But that was just the appetizer. The affair is the emotional core, Marcus continued. But the true threat lies in his financial and legal preparations. He laid out another set of documents. They were encrypted emails and text messages, retrieved by a cyber forensics expert on Marcus's team. As Ava and Elias read them, their expressions hardened. Julian had been methodically preparing to divorce Isabella for over 6 months. "He's been setting up a narrative," Ava murmured, pointing to a specific email chain between Julian and his own divorce attorney. "He's painting you as mentally unstable, Isabella. He's been documenting your emotional outbursts, twisting your valid pregnancy concerns into evidence of incipient paranoia." Isabella felt sick. "The stroller, the comments about me being hysterical." "Exactly," Elias confirmed, his voice tight with fury. He was building a case. His goal was clear. File for divorce shortly after the birth. Claim you were suffering from severe, debilitating postpartum psychosis, and petition for sole custody of your son. The sheer, diabolical cruelty of the plan was staggering. He wasn't just going to leave her. He was going to steal her child, using the very vulnerability of motherhood against her. But Marcus wasn't finished. It gets worse. The custody plan was to protect his primary asset, his money. He then revealed the true scope of Julian's deceit. For the past year, Julian, the celebrated founder of Croft Equity Partners, had been systematically defrauding his own investors. He had created a complex network of shell corporations and offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. He was siphoning millions, skimming profits, and cooking the books to inflate the company's value while secretly bleeding it dry. He planned to drain the company, file for divorce, secure the child, and disappear to a country with no extradition treaty, Marcus concluded grimly. He was building a new life with Chloe Vance, funded by stolen money. The room was silent, the weight of the revelations pressing down on them. Julian wasn't just an adulterer, he was a sociopath, a meticulous, high-functioning predator who had viewed his wife and unborn child as obstacles to be managed and discarded. Suddenly, a small detail in Marcus's report caught Elias's eye. It was the name of the chief financial officer at Croft Equity, the one person who would have had the access and ability to help facilitate such a massive fraud. Eleanor Vance. "Vance?" Elias asked, looking at Marcus. "Any relation to Chloe Vance?" Marcus nodded slowly. "She's her aunt. It appears this was a family operation. The betrayal was now complete, a tapestry woven with threads of infidelity, gaslighting, and grand larceny. For a moment, Isabella felt like she was drowning. This man, this monster, was the father of her child. Then she felt her son kick, a small, insistent flutter from within. It was a reminder of what was at stake. It wasn't just about justice anymore. It was about survival. It was about protecting the innocent life she was carrying. She looked up, meeting her father's gaze across the table. Her fear was still there, but now it was forged into something else, a cold, hard resolve. "What do we do?" she asked, her voice clear and steady. Arthur Sterling allowed a small, grim smile to touch his lips. He looked at the team he had assembled, the corporate lawyer, the family law gladiator, the FBI veteran. This was his world. This was his language. "We dismantle him," Arthur said simply. "We dismantle his company, his reputation, and his freedom. Ava, you secure Isabella and the child. Elias, you liaise with the SEC and the district attorney's office. Marcus, I want to know every dollar he's ever touched. We're not just filing for divorce, we're launching a multi-front war." He paused, his eyes locking with Isabella's. "He built a house of cards on a foundation of lies. It's time to pull the first one." The strategy Arthur Sterling devised was not a single arrow aimed at Julian's heart, but a volley launched simultaneously from 3 different directions, designed for total annihilation. He called it the Trident Offensive. The prongs were legal, financial, and reputational. Prong 1, the legal fortress, Ava Ramirez. Ava's first move was swift and decisive. Armed with Dr. Evans' sworn affidavit and photos of Isabella's bruised cheek, she secured an emergency ex parte order of protection. Julian was legally barred from contacting Isabella or coming near the Sterling penthouse. The order was served to him by a stone-faced process server at the entrance of his office building, a public humiliation that was only the first small tremor before the earthquake. Next, Ava prepared the divorce petition. It was a masterpiece of legal devastation. It didn't just cite irreconcilable differences, it laid out, in meticulous detail, a pattern of emotional abuse, conspiracy to commit parental kidnapping, and adultery, naming Chloe Vance as a co-conspirator. "We're not just asking for the divorce," Ava explained to Isabella in the quiet of the penthouse library. "We are petitioning for sole legal and physical custody, with no visitation for Julian, pending a full psychiatric evaluation. We are also filing a Ellis pendants against all known assets, effectively freezing his ability to move or sell anything of value. He's legally paralyzed." For Isabella, this was about protection. For Ava, it was about creating a legal cage from which Julian could not escape. Prong 2, the financial blitzkrieg, Elias Sterling and Marcus Thorne. While Ava built the cage, Elias and Marcus prepared to dismantle the empire. Elias, leveraging his firm's formidable reputation, arranged a clandestine meeting with the Enforcement Division of the Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC, and a contact in the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York. He didn't walk in with vague accusations. He walked in with Marcus Thorne's entire file, bank statements from offshore accounts, a detailed map of the shell corporations, and most damningly, a sworn statement from a key witness. Marcus had discovered that Eleanor Vance, the CFO and Chloe's aunt, had a massive gambling debt owed to a less than reputable casino in Atlantic City. He made a quiet approach. He didn't threaten, he offered a lifeline. He explained that a federal investigation was imminent. She could either go down as a co-conspirator, facing a decade in prison, or she could become a cooperating witness, the insider who broke the case open. He presented her with a choice between loyalty to her manipulative nephew-in-law and her own self-preservation. Faced with the ruin of her own life, Eleanor folded. She provided Marcus with a company laptop and server passwords, giving the team an unassailable digital trail of Julian's wire fraud, securities fraud, and money laundering. "The feds are taking the case," Elias reported back to the war room. "They're building a sealed indictment. Warrants will be issued for all of Croft Equity's records. They're moving fast." Prong 3, the reputational collapse, Arthur Sterling. This was Arthur's domain. He understood that in his world, perception was reality. While the legal and criminal battles raged, he would ensure Julian's name became poison in the financial community. He made 3 quiet phone calls. The first was to the head of the largest pension fund that had invested with Croft Equity. The second was to a legendary, old money investor whose backing had given Julian his initial credibility. The third was to the editor-in-chief of the Wall Street Journal, a man he played golf with twice a year. To the investors, he didn't reveal the whole story. He simply said, "I'm calling as a courtesy. I've received some disturbing information regarding the fiduciary practices at Croft Equity. My family is divesting from any fund with exposure to them. I'd suggest you do your own due diligence and do it quickly. Coming from Arthur Sterling, this was not a suggestion. It was a 5-alarm fire bell. The hint of impropriety, combined with the Sterling name pulling out, would be enough to start a bank run. To the editor, he was even more circumspect. Keep an eye on a firm called Croft Equity Partners. I have a feeling a big story is about to break there. A story about greed, betrayal, and a spectacular fall from grace. He had baited the hook. The media, smelling blood in the water, would be ready to pounce the moment the first official news broke. In the penthouse, Isabella was a protected but active participant. She reviewed every legal document, her signature firm and clear. She provided Marcus with details of conversations, timelines, and Julian's habits that helped him build his case. The fear and shock were still there, but they were now channeled into a cold, focused anger. She was no longer just a victim of Julian's plot. She was an architect of his downfall. She was fighting for her son. "It's all in motion," Arthur said one evening, as the 3 prongs of the trident were poised to strike. "He thinks he is in control. He is about to learn he's been a pawn in a game he didn't even know he was playing." The week before the storm broke was an exercise in unnerving silence. For Julian Croft, it was the best week of his life. The restraining order was a nuisance, an annoyance he attributed to Isabella's hormonal breakdown, egged on by her overbearing father. His lawyer assured him it was temporary, that they would fight it in court and paint Isabella as the unstable one. He felt invincible. He and Chloe had moved into a suite at the Four Seasons, a temporary measure while he sorted things out. To him, this was the beginning of his real life. He'd successfully moved another $2 million to his Cayman account, the last major transfer, before he planned to dissolve the company and vanish. He'd even booked a celebratory trip to Chicago for the coming weekend, a first-class flight, a suite at the Peninsula, reservations at Alinea. It was a victory lap. He had no idea that every move he made was being watched. Marcus Thorne's team was a ghost, tracking his calls, his meetings, his every keystroke. They knew about the Chicago trip. They knew about the final wire transfer. Meanwhile, the whispers Arthur Sterling had started had become a low roar on Wall Street. The head of the pension fund quietly initiated a full audit of Croft Equity. The old money investor pulled his 8-figure investment, citing a shift in strategy. Other investors, noticing the 2 biggest players pulling back, began making their own nervous calls. Julian's phone started ringing more often. He dismissed it as market jitters, his arrogance a shield against the mounting evidence of his own implosion. The most critical piece of the puzzle was clicking into place inside the offices of Croft Equity. Eleanor Vance, the CFO, was a nervous wreck, but she followed Marcus's instructions to the letter. She copied server data to a thumbs drive. She flagged specific transactions for the coming federal audit. She played the part of the loyal, overworked executive, all while providing the government with the ammunition it needed to blow the company's doors off. She saw it as her only path to redemption, a way to mitigate the damage her weakness and greed had helped cause. In the Sterling penthouse, the atmosphere was one of tense anticipation. Isabella focused on her health and her baby. She practiced prenatal yoga, read books on motherhood, and worked with a therapist Ava had recommended. But beneath the calm surface, she was a coiled spring. She was waiting for the signal. The signal came on a Thursday afternoon. Elias received a call from his contact at the U.S. Attorney's office. "The indictment is sealed," the voice on the other end said. "Warrants will be executed tomorrow, Friday, at 10 a.m. sharp." Elias hung up and looked at his father and Ava. "It's time," Arthur nodded. He's scheduled to fly to Chicago with Chloe Vance tomorrow at 8 in the morning. Perfect, Ava said with a chilling smile. He'll be 800 miles away, completely isolated, when his world ends. He won't be able to interfere with the raid, shred documents, or intimidate employees. That evening, Isabella sat down at her laptop. Her hands were steady as she typed. It wasn't a long letter. It didn't contain accusations or rage. It was a simple, declarative statement. A death certificate for their marriage, and for the man she once knew. She saved it as a draft in her email, the recipient address, julian.croftercroftequity.com. A bitter irony. The subject line was 2 words. Goodbye, Julian. She would hit send at exactly 10:01 a.m. the next morning. While federal agents were swarming his office and his life's work was being packed into evidence boxes, his phone would chime, and he would finally understand that he hadn't just lost his company or his freedom. He had lost everything. The air in the first-class cabin of the flight to Chicago was crisp and cool. Julian Croft settled into his plush leather seat, accepting a glass of champagne from the flight attendant. Beside him, Chloe Vance scrolled through her phone, a picture of effortless glamour. Julian felt a profound sense of satisfaction. Everything was falling into place. To us, he said, clinking his glass against hers. To the future. To the future, she echoed, her smile bright. She had no idea their future was about to be measured in years of litigation and federal indictments. She, like Julian, was blissfully, ignorantly triumphant. He saw the restraining order as a minor setback. In his mind, Isabella was a problem to be managed. Her father was a bully, but Arthur Sterling couldn't touch him. He was too smart, his financial dealings too labyrinthine. He believed he was a master of a universe of his own creation. As the plane ascended, banking over the sprawling New York City skyline, he felt like he was rising above all his problems, leaving the mess of his old life behind. He was untouchable. Back in New York, at 9:55 a.m., a fleet of black government sedans pulled up discreetly to the curb, a block away from the gleaming skyscraper that housed the offices of Croft Equity Partners. FBI agents, clad in dark suits, mingled with SEC investigators holding briefcases. They were a silent, disciplined army, waiting for the clock to strike 10. Inside the Sterling penthouse, Isabella sat with her father and Elias, a news channel playing silently on the large screen in front of them. She held her phone in her hand, her thumb hovering over the send button on her drafted email. The tension was thick enough to taste. At 10:00 a.m. sharp, the agents moved. They swarmed the lobby of the building, showing their warrants to the stunned security guards. They took control of the elevators, ascending to the 45th floor. Employees of Croft Equity looked up from their desks, confused, as 24 serious-faced men and women in suits entered their pristine offices and announced, "FBI, SEC, everyone step away from your computers. Do not touch anything." Simultaneously, across the city and in the Cayman Islands, court orders were being executed. Bank accounts were frozen. Safe deposit boxes were sealed. The intricate financial web Julian had spent years building was being severed at every node, all at once. The pension fund manager who had spoken to Arthur received an official notification of the federal raid. He immediately called an emergency board meeting. The old money investor saw the first news alert on his Bloomberg terminal. He started calling his contacts, confirming what Arthur had hinted at. The reputational collapse had begun. In Chicago, Julian and Chloe's plane touched down at O'Hare. As they taxied to the gate, Julian switched his phone off airplane mode. He was expecting a confirmation from his hotel, maybe an email from a client. At 10:01 a.m. New York time, Isabella took a deep breath and pressed send. The email arrived in Julian's inbox, just as a flurry of other notifications began to pour in. His phone buzzed incessantly, a frantic, angry vibration. News alerts from the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times. Dozens of missed calls from his top partners. Panicked texts from his office manager. But the first one he opened was the one from Isabella. Subject, "Goodbye, Julian." The message was simple. By the time you read this, it will all be over. Your office is being raided. Your accounts are frozen. Everything you built on lies has been exposed. I know about the fraud. I know about the offshore accounts. I know about your plan to take our son. You didn't just betray me. You tried to erase me. You will never see me again. And you will never, ever be a father to my child. This is not the end of my story. It's the end of yours, Isabella. He stared at the phone, the words blurring. It didn't make sense. It was impossible. He tried to call his office. The line was dead. He tried to call his lawyer, who didn't pick up. He frantically searched for news, and there it was, the headline blazing across his screen. Croft Equity Partners raided by FBI in massive fraud investigation. His face went white. The blood drained from it, leaving a pasty grey mask of disbelief. Chloe looked at him, her smile faltering. "Julian, what is it? What's wrong?" He couldn't speak. He was no longer a master of the universe. He was a man in a first-class seat on a plane in a city 800 miles from home, watching his entire world burn down on the screen of his phone. The champagne flute slipped from his numb fingers, shattering on the floor, the sound lost in the triumphant roar of his own spectacular ruin. The fallout was swift and brutal. Julian Croft's name, once a symbol of audacious success on Wall Street, became a byword for disgrace. The media frenzy was relentless. Photos of FBI agents carrying boxes of evidence from his gleaming offices were on every news channel. Reporters swarmed his apartment building, the Four Seasons, and even his parents' quiet suburban home. Julian's arrest was a quiet, almost anticlimactic affair. Two plainclothes detectives met him at the gate as he disembarked from the first flight back to New York. There was no struggle, no dramatic confrontation. He was a ghost, hollowed out by the shock of his sudden and total ruin. The photo of him in handcuffs, his expensive suit rumpled, his face a mask of dazed despair, became the defining image of the scandal. Chloe Vance, stripped of her access to Julian's frozen accounts and facing her own potential indictment as a co-conspirator, folded immediately. Her lawyer cut a deal with the prosecution. In exchange for immunity, she would testify against Julian, corroborating the affair, his manipulative behavior, and what she knew of his financial crimes. Her loyalty, it turned out, was as transactional as everything else in Julian's life. In the war room, the atmosphere was one of grim satisfaction. The battle was won, but the cost was still being tallied. Isabella watched the news reports with a strange sense of detachment. The man on the screen was a stranger to her, a villain in a story she had somehow survived. Her focus was singular, the life growing inside her. The evidence against Julian was overwhelming. The documents from Eleanor Vance, the testimony from Chloe, the digital trail of wire transfers, and the mountain of evidence seized from his office painted an irrefutable picture of a massive, long-running fraud. His high-powered legal team advised him that a trial would be a public crucifixion, resulting in a sentence of 30 years to life. His only option was a plea deal. He pleaded guilty to multiple counts of wire fraud, securities fraud, and money laundering. He agreed to cooperate in recovering the stolen funds from his offshore accounts. In the end, facing the combined might of the U.S. government and the Sterling family, he accepted a sentence of 15 years in a federal prison, plus a lifetime of restitution payments to the investors he had defrauded. The family court proceedings were a mere formality. With Julian's felony conviction and the clear evidence of his abuse and manipulative intent, Ava Ramirez easily secured a final judgment. Isabella was granted sole legal and physical custody of their unborn child. Julian's parental rights were terminated. The judgment was absolute. He would have no claim, no contact, no rights whatsoever. The Sterling fortress had held. Months later, as the autumn leaves turned brilliant shades of red and gold in Central Park, Isabella went into labor. Arthur and Elias were with her, a silent, steadfast presence in the hospital, a place that no longer held the ghosts of betrayal, but the promise of a new beginning. After 12 hours of labor, she gave birth to a healthy, beautiful baby girl. She had expected a boy, but life, it seemed, was full of surprises. As the nurse placed the tiny, wailing infant in her arms, Isabella looked into her daughter's dark, curious eyes, and felt a love so fierce and overwhelming it eclipsed all the pain and anger of the past year. "What's her name?" Arthur asked, his voice thick with uncharacteristic emotion as he looked at his first grandchild. Isabella smiled, tears of joy streaming down her face. She had thought of names for a son, strong, traditional names. But for this little girl, who represented so much more than just a new life, only one name felt right. "Lily," she whispered. "Lily Hope Sterling. Hope." It was what Lily had given her. A reason to fight, a reason to rebuild, a reason to look forward. In the months that followed, Isabella blossomed into a confident and devoted mother. The trauma of Julian's betrayal had left scars, but they were no longer open wounds. They were reminders of her own strength. With her father's guidance, she began to find a new purpose beyond motherhood. She saw how the legal system, with its costs and complexities, was often tilted against victims of domestic abuse, especially when financial control was used as a weapon. She had been lucky. She had Arthur Sterling in her corner. But what about the women who had no one? With a significant portion of her divorce settlement, the legitimate assets that were untainted by Julian's fraud, and a foundational grant from her father, she established a new organization, the Sterling Foundation for Family Justice. Its mission was to provide top-tier legal representation, financial counseling, and therapeutic support for victims of domestic abuse, particularly in high-conflict divorce and custody cases involving financial manipulation. She became its public face, its driving force. Her story, once a private horror, became a public testament to survival and empowerment. She was no longer Isabella Croft, the victim. She was Isabella Sterling, the advocate. Years passed. Lily grew into a bright, inquisitive, and happy child, secure in the love of her mother, her grandfather, and her uncle. She knew her father was a man named Julian, who had made very bad mistakes and was away in a place where he had to think about them. For a child, it was a simple, acceptable truth. Julian, meanwhile, was released from prison after serving 10 years of his 15-year sentence, his term reduced for good behavior, and his cooperation in recovering stolen funds. The man who walked out of the federal penitentiary was not the same one who had walked in. The arrogance had been stripped away, replaced by a quiet, haunted humility. He had lost a decade of his life, his fortune, and his reputation. He had spent years in therapy, confronting the depths of his own narcissism and the wreckage he had caused. He moved to a small, nondescript apartment in Queens, taking a job in the back office of a logistics company, the only place that would hire a convicted felon with his notoriety. After a year of living a quiet, solitary life, he wrote a letter, not to Isabella, but to Arthur Sterling. It was a simple, handwritten note with none of his old manipulative flair. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He didn't make excuses. He simply stated that he understood the gravity of his actions and that his greatest regret was the loss of his child. He asked for nothing but to convey to Arthur his profound and unending remorse. Arthur, to Isabella's surprise, showed her the letter. "People can change, Izzy," he said quietly, "but trust must be earned, not given." Isabella was torn. The protective mother in her wanted to keep Lily 1,000 miles away from the man who had tried to steal her. But she also saw her daughter starting to ask more questions, to look at other children with their fathers with a wistful curiosity. She agreed to a meeting. It took place in a neutral location, the office of a family therapist. Julian looked older, grayer. The expensive suits were gone, replaced by a simple shirt and slacks. When he saw Isabella, he flinched, as if expecting a blow. "I don't want anything from you, Isabella," he said, his voice raspy. "I have no right to ask for forgiveness. I want you to know that I am sorry. For everything." He then explained that he had been putting aside a small portion of his meager salary every month into a trust fund for Lily. It wasn't much, but it was all he had. This was the beginning of a long, slow, and fragile process. It started with him writing letters to Lily, which Isabella would read to her. Then came supervised visits at a therapeutic center, with a counselor present at all times. Julian never overstepped. He was gentle, patient, and seemed content just to be in his daughter's presence, answering her questions honestly but age-appropriately. He was building a fragile bridge, stone by painstaking stone, across the chasm of his own creation. 5 years later, the bridge was still standing. The visits had moved from the therapist's office to a public park, and then to short, supervised outings for ice cream. Julian was a consistent, quiet presence in the periphery of Lily's life. He would never be her primary parent, but he was becoming her father. Isabella watched this evolution with a complex mix of emotions. The old anger had faded, replaced by a wary but growing respect for the effort Julian was making. She saw that his redemption wasn't a performance. It was a quiet, daily commitment. Her own life was full and rewarding. The Sterling Foundation had become a national force for change, helping thousands of women and children escape abusive situations. She had found a new kind of love, not in a romantic partner, but in her work, her family, and her daughter. One crisp Saturday afternoon, Isabella stood on the sidelines of a soccer field in Central Park, watching Lily's team play. Lily, now a spirited 10-year-old, scored a goal, and her face lit up with pure joy. She looked to the sidelines, and her eyes found her mother's. Isabella cheered, her heart swelling with pride. Then, Lily's gaze shifted to a spot a little further down the line, where a man stood by himself, leaning against a tree. It was Julian. He wasn't allowed on the main sidelines with the other parents, a boundary they had all agreed upon. But he came to every game. He watched from a distance, and after it was over, he would give Lily a high five and tell her she played a great game before quietly leaving. Lily waved at him, and he waved back, a small, genuine smile on his face. In that moment, Isabella saw the full picture of her life. It wasn't the life she had once imagined, but it was real, and it was hers. The betrayal, the fight, the collapse. It had all led here, to this soccer field, where a mother and a father, no longer partners but bound forever by their love for their child, could watch their daughter score a goal, their shared past, a healed scar, rather than a gaping wound. Arthur Sterling stood beside her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You did good, Izzy," he said, not looking at Julian, but at the radiant smile on his granddaughter's face. "You built something better." Isabella nodded, a sense of profound and lasting peace settling over her. The storm was over. She had survived, she had fought, and she had won. Not just for herself, but for Lily. And in the quiet afternoon light, that felt like the greatest victory of all. Isabella's journey from a devastating betrayal to a life of purpose and peace is a powerful reminder that our deepest wounds can often become our greatest strengths. She didn't just survive. She rebuilt her world and dedicated her life to helping others rebuild theirs. What did you think of Arthur Sterling's decisive actions? Could you ever find it in your heart to forgive a betrayal like Julian's? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story touched you, please give it a like, share it with someone who needs to hear a story of resilience, and subscribe for more powerful, real-life dramas.